Welcome to Booktopia TV and welcome Jon Klassen.
Thanks for having me.
Jon is the author of many favorite children's books, including the classic Hat trilogy of I Want My Hat Back, This Is Not My Hat, and We Found a Hat. And your latest book is The Rock from the Sky, and you can order that right now, along with all of Jon's other books at booktopia.com.au. Jon, welcome to Booktopia.
Thank you.
So we were having a chat before about the way that you're kind of a master of deadpan humor in your books, and you're able to convey so much just with the eyes of the characters. And we were wondering if you could do a little demonstration and show us how you achieve some of these effects.
I can do that roughly. I'll have to use my trackpad and a finger to do it here because of what's set up, but we will try and approximate something anyway. So yeah, I can do that.
Awesome. All right. So can you tell us a little bit about The Rock from the Sky?
Yeah. Well, The Rock from the Sky is 5 sort of short stories that are interconnected, at least roughly. But I'm hoping that most of them are sort of self-sufficient too, and that it's just the last story that everything sort of adds up, or at least connects. And the first story is sort of about 2 characters that are just arguing about sort of where they might want to stand in a field for no real reason, but above them, shown to the audience, is a giant rock that's falling in the sky. And we don't know how far away it is, but we know that it's coming. And that's sort of the premise of the first story, and it lands in the first story. And then the stories after that are sort of just about hanging out around the rock and what happens after the rock has landed and what those days sort of feel like, but also an alien kind of shows up, and then goes away and then comes back. There's a lot of, I kind of toggle between stories that a lot of stuff happens in and almost nothing happens in. I wanted both of those things. So that's sort of the rhythm of the book.
There's almost this sense of impending doom, I guess. And I almost feel like that's a common theme in your work, because when you read I Want My Hat Back for the first time, obviously that story winds up with quite a dark ending. And so then when you read your other books, you kind of know that you can go there as an author.
Right, you can.
So when you're reading the first story in The Rock from the Sky and you see the rock falling, it's kind of edge of your seat stuff for a kid's book.
My hope is that you can sort of trust that I'm not going to kill anybody off who doesn't sort of, at least dramatically, have it coming. The turtle hasn't really done enough to warrant being crushed by a rock, but you do wonder, the rock is coming and he's got no reason to move, at least he says so. So yeah, I hope that, but I hope my readers aren't too traumatized by that.
And do we have a bit of a turtle developing here?
We have a turtle developing. That's a good way of putting it. He's going to be a little bit asymmetrical as far as he goes, but that's because of the trackpad finger sort of setup I've got. But I wanted to talk about pupils especially, because pupils are the important part. I think that pupils and context, I think, are the 2 tricks about this. You can talk about sort of subtlety and drawing of the eyes, but that's not actually the trick. The trick is sort of telling your audience what they're looking at and then sort of drawing something kind of blank. So if we draw the turtle's eyes, sort of the pupils rather, in the middle of his eyes, and we leave a little bit of white space around the pupil so that no part of the pupil is touching the edge of the eyes, we're going to fill those with black. Right, okay, so he's a little bit, he needs to be focused a little bit. He's not looking right at us right now. Let's bring him in. There we go. So what happens is something like, oh no, I moved my whole drawing. Hold on, this is live drawing. Let's do that again. So what happens when you leave a little bit of white space around a pupil is the character looks sort of surprised or scared or something. They don't look altogether calm. And that is, you can say almost anything over this and it'll look sort of effective. You can say, this turtle is terrified, or this turtle has to go to the bathroom, or this turtle just saw a ghost. And any one of those things, as soon as you say that, you think, oh yeah, he looks scared, or he looks hungry, or maybe he looks like tired, maybe he hasn't slept in 5 days, you say that. And any one of those things begins to apply itself to the drawing, and you sort of overlay that with your experience. And so it's not even about the right kind of information. It's about very little information when it comes to eyes, I think. It's a lot of fun because then you're not really, stressed out about, well, can I draw a stressed out turtle? Can I draw a guilty turtle? Can I draw a tired turtle? You're just thinking, well, I just have to sort of know the symbols of those. And so, like, for instance, if we grow the eyes, if we make them very big, he will look, oh boy, this is really my poor little finger trackpad. There we go. Okay, this is great. I like how I'm supposed to be an illustrator, and this is what we've got going on here. All right. Chop that little bit off. There we go. Okay, and so then we make the whites of the eyes very big. And now he looks, well, he looks sort of drunk, but he looks a little bit cuter than he did. And we can we can go further with that. The bigger you make the pupils, the cuter a character looks, because he's supposed to sort of be younger then, or bigger eyes, or something about just giant eyes makes the character look very cute. And so if we do, like, I would never do that, but now I sort of, want to buy that turtle an ice cream cone or something. He's looking at me like he wants something. And we haven't changed anything about the turtle's pose. You can't really pose a turtle anyway, which is why I like to draw them. Nothing in their body language can sort of give you any emotional clues. It's just in the eyes, and mostly in the eyes direction, very simply. And so a lot of my books have turtles or animals that don't really have an opportunity to move their bodies in a way that might show how you're feeling. You have to really listen to them and look for small clues in their faces to sort of find that out.
Are there animals that, you mentioned you enjoy drawing turtles because you can kind of do this thing with their eyes. Are there other animals that you avoid drawing because you can't kind of emote in the same way?
I avoid drawing people. Those animals are tricky to draw. People are very emotive, right? Anything that sort of, I would say a snake, but I drew a snake for this book and I didn't really use that. You could see how if a snake was sad, he might bend his neck or sort of be sort of droopy or something, but we don't really do that with snakes either. I think, and yeah, any animal where you have like dogs, for instance. Dogs they have tails and ears that can perk up if they're happy or sad or something like that. And I don't usually draw those ones because there's a couple of them in the books, but they don't change very much. I think it's almost for the opposite reason that you might choose a character in a different kind of book, right? It's like, well, that's a very expressive character. We can use that. I sort of go the other way, where it's like you really have to pay attention now to the writing and the story, because I'm going to give you there's almost no visual information in the drawing.
Yeah, I saw an interview with you where you were talking about how the impact of the text on the page and the way that informs the picture. Kind of like what you were saying before about how, you can kind of it put your own experience onto the character, but then the words that are on the page really direct that. And your words are very, very very, very sparse. It's not a huge amount of dense text. So there's that impact of like short, sharp sentence and expressive eyes. How long does it take you to get to that place where you've got the eyes right and then you've got the text just right? Is that a simple process for you, or does it take a long time to get there?
No, it takes a minute. I think that you sort of forget how to do it every time at the end of a book, because every book kind of starts differently and with different sort of prompts in your head. And I'm beginning now, just with this book, it started, and maybe the little bit of the third hat book, where you sort of let go of your initial idea of what you think the story ought to be and sort of let the book kind of tell you where it's going. And it's just a very interesting process that way to make. And you're not sort of coloring in lines that you made ages ago, right? It's just, it lets it sort of be organic. Because of that, making it feel controlled and graphic is even harder, because you've had this sort of weird meandering wandering process that you're now trying to translate into a very sparse graphic kind of feeling. And so, yeah, keeping to that takes a minute, and it's a lot of editing and chopping, or just sort of rereading it and being like, no, that's not right. That's not the right thing. It's not what I want. And as vague as that answer can sound, it's not like you have some sort of perfect sentence in your head that you're trying to get to. It's just you're trying to not dislike what you've written. Is very simply what you're trying to get to. As far as how good it can be, I don't think that authors are very good judges of how good the thing is. They just have to know they don't hate it, or it doesn't offend whatever they were trying to do initially.
Rock from the Sky, if I'm not mistaken, is the longest book that you've put out. Did you know when you started to write it that it was going to turn into this kind of 5-story collection, or did you just start off with the one idea and then it kind of grew out of that?
It was it was the one idea, but I knew that idea wasn't going to hold a book too. The first story in the book where the rock falls and lands was a gag that I liked, and I thought it was enough to, I just wanted to solve that story idea, even though I knew it wasn't going to be a book on its own. It was just too light and too, it's too much of a gag to justify a whole book. And, but once it had landed, the thing that, my main problem with that story was that there's a turtle standing on the ground saying, I'm never going to move. I like right where I'm standing. Then there's a giant rock. Excuse me. And this rock, the whole job of you as a storyteller then is to get that turtle out of the way in a way that the reader will believe and not feel like it was a forced thing. Because obviously you can walk a turtle away as a storyteller, but I needed to find a way to do it where you sort of bought it as a reader. And it took forever to figure that out. And the only thing I really believed was what's in the story now. And that is the turtle getting jealous of this friend who's across the page, making another friend. And when that finally sort of proposed itself, when that was on the page, I thought, oh, well, that's interesting that that's the only thing I'm sort of believing in here, because that actually proposes a relationship that I can keep going with. Once this rock has landed, it sort of answered a question for me as to how we might get more stories out of these guys, because now there's things they aren't talking about. The turtle isn't saying he likes the mole, armadillo, whatever that guy is, and the mole isn't really saying it back. They're having some sort of an unspoken fight that we can keep going with. I believe in this. And so we can sort of take 3 or 4 more stories to find out where it goes. And I didn't have a plan for those stories either, but I wanted to do a day where it felt like you crossed from dawn to midday to sunset through to the night. And then let's just see what stories fit those times of days.
With that initial idea that you had about the rock kind of falling, did that come to you first as kind of a concept or an image?
An image, but an image that sort of does more work avoiding things than it does giving you information. I think that in my books, increasingly, especially with this one, I like the problem to be something impersonal and like not like a villain who has a specific, evil goal or something like that, but just something that's unknowable. And it poses this direct line of a problem that's going to happen. And there's no real reason for it, no reason that we can understand anyway. But a rock sort of does that. And it's also something that kids can draw really easily. I'm increasingly getting more interested in that, to having characters and problems and even sort of whole pictures that kids can kind of see their way to drawing so that they're not too complicated. And there's no wrong way to draw a rock. You can draw a rock any way you want and sort of participate in that and feel like you drew something from the book if you want to. And I liked that about it. And I liked also that once we sort of showed the turtle on the ground and then you turn the page and there's a giant rock on the picture with no words, you're doing work now. That rock has turned into a threat and a problem where it wouldn't have been as a drawing on its own. And so the more you can load the book that way and say, you guys do the work too. When you look at this rock now, what do you know about it that we didn't know if we had seen it on its own? And providing context for very simple pictures is like a lot of why I like this kind of work.
I read a review that said that your books are often about varying degrees of justice. Is that an idea that makes sense to you? And do you think that tracks for The Rock from the Sky?
I think so, or at least maybe justice is a tricky concept. I think that the idea of deserves, whatever the subtlety is between those two terms, because there's a lot about this book that we don't understand, that's about not understanding and not knowing if they were to be hit by the rock, would they have had that coming or not? And the character that does eventually get hit by a rock, did he have that coming? Did it have that coming? And deciding, in a gut sort of way, me as a storyteller and them as an audience, without too much information, how do we feel about that? Was that the right move? For me as a storyteller, I guess in this one, because I'm sort of controlling the rocks. But in the other books, when characters overreact or do something wrong, and then another character in turn overreacts as a sort of a revenge or some sort of comeuppance, was that the right move? And what is the discussion there? And who deserves what? And how much of life is deserves and how much of it can't be judged like that? And it's a huge question for kids, I find, as much as adults, is, they want to know, well, was that the right thing to do? Should I be punished for that? Or was that punishment even right? Like, what do I deserve? And like the concept of that and breaking it down even and taking it out of the equation and sort of treating it in this book sort of absurdly, that we don't really know why some things happen and we can't control everything. And that being a concept to talk about with kids too, that, it was a little while before when I was little that I discovered, or at least came to terms with the idea that even adults don't know why everything happens. We don't have a lot of answers for some things. And it's something you have to deal with. Kids don't know everything either. They don't know almost anything that they're being sort of led around the world looking at. And they're going through their days. You have to manage that emotionally, that you don't know a lot of things. And so just dealing with that, I guess, sort of, yeah, going from deserves into just not knowing at all, why some things happen, I think is meaningful to me anyway. It helps me get through my day.
I think a common experience that a lot of parents have reading your books and children's books in general is the request from your kids to do the voices when you read it. Do you have in your head like clear voices for all of your characters?
No, I've never had that. And I think it's really strange, but maybe I'm the only one who doesn't get to, because whenever I go to libraries or schools who have teachers and parents and whoever who are very talented readers and do it all the time, I'm always impressed by the energy that goes into those voices and those differences between the characters. I like to provide opportunities for them, but when I read the books, I sort of read them like a legal document or something. It's very, very straight, because my idea is done. I don't really have an idea of what the perfect reading might be. You can hear a lot of different good versions of it and versions that you don't disagree with. Sometimes you hear one, you're like, that's not right at all. But most of the time you hear just a lot of really interesting takes on it. And that's the fun of this stuff, is that you do, like, I'm done. When I put the book out, there isn't some perfect audio version of it or a reading of it in my head. I think I find that something I like about books is that they're very quiet to me. I worked in film for a while, and film has this great tool of sound and performance, right? And how you would deliver a line, and that being part of what film is. But books were so interesting when I got into them because of the absence of that, because it is on its own a very quiet medium. And there's almost like an ambient sort of hum to some of the books, especially when you take out the narrator like I do. I find that when no one says anything on the page, then there's this sort of, it's like almost what you were saying, where there's this feeling of like foreboding or something when no one is saying anything, when you're used to someone saying something. I really like that. And so the mixture of that combined with whatever people feel like reading it, I find it very flattering that they do put the energy into it, because it's really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that great moment in I Want My Hat Back where the bear and the rabbit just like stare at each other across the page.
Yeah, I feel bad for readers, teachers and parents and stuff who are reading the books out loud on some of those pages, because I haven't given them much to do, right? Like, I think that my best memories of reading when I was little was reading on my own, reading in a library on the floor or something like that, or in a bed by myself. And so I write for that experience, I think, more that like a kid wouldn't be asked to make a noise on that page. They would just sort of hear it in their head. But then I go out on tour or something and read it to kids and like get to a page like that page where there's nothing written. And I have to make some sort of sound. You have to say something. And so you have to ad lib. And there are talented people to do that. And there are people like me who just make a noise and turn the page or something. Just panic.
My kids like to do they like to do music on that page, like a dun dun
Oh
dun.
yeah. That's what you sort of want it dramatically to prompt something like that, where you're like, yeah, this has a musical cue almost, or like even a word you're not allowed to say. Something like that would probably be here if we had a different format, but for now we have to leave it silent.
So when you're writing, are you thinking in terms of your audience as the kids who are going to be hearing the book, or as the parents who are going to be reading this to their kids, or as a little of both, or yeah?
A little of both, I guess. Increasingly, I try to make it. I think when I was like younger and getting into it, I was a little bit more sarcastic about them, and I sort of wanted to justify my own interests in the books as much as interest the kids in it, and so they were a little drier. And I don't think that the kids weren't on my mind. I hope, and that first book seems to go over with younger ones, and so I don't think that we were over their heads or anything. But increasingly, even just subject matter wise, this book has a giant alien in it that just walks in out of nowhere. And I think that was me sort of kind of admitting who this book was supposed to be for, right? Like the book before that had just been about like having a nap or something, which was a thing I'm interested in as a 40-year-old, but I don't know if it interests a 4-year-old. And so we're like, okay, well, for getting through that one here, you get an alien as a present, like that kind of sort of give and take where you are thinking of them. I'm trying to, and I make an effort to think about the kids first. And then I think in the tone of the books and maybe in their overall structure, it's not so much that I want to talk to parents or do a joke, above the kids' heads. I think it's that I'd like to interest myself in the book. And so I, as an adult and as a parent, sort of look for things in the book that would interest me to make it. which is a healthy thing to do, I think, for people who make things for kids. I think kids can sniff out when the adult was bored making the thing for them, or thinking that it was beneath them to do it. These books are really hard for my brain. I work as hard as I can on them. And so I don't want them to ever feel like I was bored just because they're little and they're, they haven't been around as long or something. I want to work really hard and make it make sense to me and make it interesting. And so it's not so much that there's sections of the stories for an adult and sections for a kid. It's that the stories are for them, but you somehow want to find the clue that you were also interested as a grown-up in it.
Are there some basic like drawing tips that you would have for people who want to have a go?
Don't draw what you don't think you want to draw, I think, or even there are some things that you even want to draw that you can't yet, and you're going to be miserable trying to draw those things at first. Give yourself, be easy on yourself at first. I get most of my work out of being easy on myself, at least to a certain extent, because again, you want to show that you're interested. And if you decide to draw a horse as your first drawing, and horses are very hard to draw, it's going to look like it was really hard to draw. And no one wants to see themselves or see someone else torture themselves through a horse. And you can see it on the page when a horse was really hard to draw. And so draw yourself a rock, draw yourself a turtle, go easy, it's okay. And find stories that will then match where you're at. And you'll get better because you've drawn, you just keep drawing, and that's how you do get better. But if you're not interested, you're not going to, it's going to show. And so, meet yourself in the middle that way a little bit. That's my advice.
At what point in your life did you realize that you wanted to become an illustrator as a career?
As an illustrator, it was fairly late. I always wanted to be in animation. I think I wanted a job. I knew about books and book illustrators, but I think I always pictured like Mr. Eric Carle, who just died last night. Someone like that who was sort of, there's a certain kind of charming quality to them in the life that you picture them leading, and just the way that the work would magically somehow appear from their barns or wherever they made them. And I just didn't know how you got into that. It wasn't a job I thought you could get. I thought you were sort of anointed with it somehow. And animated films I always wanted to work in, and so I worked in those for a while, and then in the evenings did my own thing when I started to get sort of offers for one book here or there. And I did a few books and realized pretty quickly that it suited like all of my sensibilities. And I was really worried because I was like, maybe I found this thing I love that isn't a job. Maybe I've just found this really interesting hobby that's going to make me sad all day at work. And it didn't. It turned out that I got enough books going, and that was about 10 years ago. And it's still somehow my job. And so it was sort of a side door in, but I'm very glad to have found it.
And what are you working on next? Or are you going to take a bit of a well-earned break after?
No, there's no breaks, it turns out. It feels like there are breaks to people who I think, don't see this happening because books only come out every like 2 years or 3 years or something silly like that. But you're always working on something that will then come out much later. Now I'm working on a folktale that I'm adapting myself, but I read it a couple of years ago, and it's a scary one. And those were always my favorite books when I was especially sort of second or third grade, was scary books, ghost stories and things like that. And this one is sort of a ghost story. I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be a little longer again. I think it might be short chapters, maybe even more so than this one. Yeah, I'm very excited.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jon. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me on. Hi to you guys over there.
And you can order The Rock from the Sky and all of Jon's other books right now at booktopia.com.au.